I wanted to get started, though, Governor. You've been a Republican political figure for decades, and you recently announced that you're launching a new independent party called Forward alongside former Democratic presidential candidate Andrew Yang. I'm curious what motivated you to form this party after being a Republican for so long?
Well, I was watching what was happening with the political system in our country and what was happening with our parties. I don't think there's a Republican Party anymore. Frankly, it's a cult. It did not adopt a platform at the 2020 convention, so there's no set of central principles on which it's based. It's whatever Donald Trump says people should believe at any particular moment, and that's what they do. So that's not my definition of a party. And when I wrote my book in 2005, It's My Party Too, I was worried about this very thing happening. And watching what was going on, it was clear that we needed to do something different. So I started with the Renew America movement. And we began as Republicans who were trying to bring the Republican Party back to the center on the basis that this country does best when you have a center-right and a center-left party. But the centers were being split off. I mean, people were going more and more to the extremes. And so we realized early on at RAM that, in fact, it wasn't just Republicans that we needed centrist Democrats, too. So we were already starting to look at and endorse candidates from both sides of the aisle who were willing to work together, who respected the rule of law, who believed in the Constitution. And then Andrew Yang was working with his Forward Party, doing the same kind of thing. And then David Jolly, the Save America movement. And again, we were all looking for the center. We figured we need to be together because that's the way to do it. It has to be bipartisan. It has to be Republicans. It has to be Democrats. We just want people who are going to work together, who believe in those principles. And for us now at Forward, the only two actual positions that we ask people to agree to is to support open primaries and ranked choice voting. Because if we don't change the system, we're never going to be able to change the outcome. So we're working with our candidates, the candidates we've endorsed from Forward. We've endorsed Republicans, Democrats, Independents across the board. And we're trying to remind people there are 500,000 elective offices across this country. And in 2020, 70% of those were uncontested. That's just wrong. Everybody should have a choice. And that's where we're focusing, is on those elections, not so much on 2024. Everybody thinks about that. And not so much on we endorse congressional candidates and senatorial candidates, but we're also endorsing down ballot because those are every bit as important.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, Governor, since Forward is not formally registered yet, how are you voting next week? And are you an independent? Are you still a registered Republican? How do you expect to vote in next week's elections?
I'm a registered Republican, but I vote as an independent because I vote for the person. And I have been doing that for a while. There are people within the Republican Party whom I respect and support, and there are people within the Republican Party that I don't and I won't support. So I base it on the candidate.
Mm-hmm. Going back to talking about Forward, there have been several attempts in the past to launch a third party, many of which have failed.
Right.
And there's always a concern as well that an independent party will siphon a lot of votes, particularly away from Democrats and the centrist figures you're discussing. Why do you think Forward is different, and how do you think it can succeed when so many others haven't?
Sure. Well, there are several reasons. It's right now as much a movement as a party, because we are in getting people together to say, you deserve another choice between these two parties. We're in a different place today. Over 60% of Americans say they'd welcome a third opportunity, and better than 50%, or right around 50% of registered voters are registered independent. Mm-hmm. That's never happened in the country before. So there's a hunger there for something different. The other third-party efforts have been largely based on one person or one set of ideas, a Green Party. I mean, one set of issues. We're broader than that. We're looking to get on the ballot in 15 states by the end of this year, 30 by the end of next year, and hopefully all of them in 2024, 2025. But this is going to take a long time. Mm-hmm. It's not going to happen overnight. We recognize that. We're focused, as I said before, on the down ballots because, frankly, what happens in state legislatures, what happens at the local level, those are the people that make decisions that affect your life most immediately and most directly. And then they have a huge impact as you're building up. So it's important to get people to understand that those races, they need to focus on those. And we all tend to think of elections as being national, but they're run by the states. And in this election cycle, it's become particularly important. And we're working hard on this to get people to understand what a Secretary of State, a state's attorneys general, or a governor does, what their ability is to affect how elections are handled. I mean, you have states now, you have 18 candidates for governor, Republican, who are election deniers.
Right.
You have 10 candidates across the country running for attorney general who are election deniers, and you have 12 states where you have election deniers running for Secretary of State. What we're trying to say is, do you really want to put in place a person who doesn't believe in the system to have them oversee the system? Does that make sense? And you should understand the importance of that and who they are. But as a party, we don't feel we have to have candidates in every race. And we're never going to feel that. We feel, and that's why we won't be spoilers, because if you have someone who believes in our principles running against someone who's way out, right or left, we won't play in that race. That's fine. We'll get behind the one who believes as we do, and we'll support the issues that we think are important. But beyond that, we're really about ensuring that every race does have a challenge, so there's somebody else there, and the importance of changing, of electoral reform just in general, but particularly we think open primaries and ranked choice voting would make a huge difference.
And what about, I know you said you're focused on down ballot races, but will you put forward a candidate for 2024 in the presidential
No idea.
race?
No idea.
Have you thought about who you might want?
No, because that's not where we are.
Okay.
I mean, we are really, that's what makes us different. We really aren't focused on that. And who knows what's going to happen? Who knows who the candidates are? If it is two extremes, maybe we will. But of course, you have other groups that are focused on that exclusively, on the presidential. And so we'll leave it to them to do that.
Right. I'm curious, you know, and we were just talking with Mike about this backstage. You're kind of the definition of sanity. You're preaching sanity right now across the country when so many Republicans are wrapped up in this new wave of disinformation, and we're seeing a lot of threats to democracy. I'm curious, I know we saw Liz Cheney this week come out and support and endorse Alyssa Slotkin, Tim Ryan. I'm curious if there's others like her. Do you think this movement of people starting to speak out, is it a movement, I guess I should say? And also, who do you find to be the most admirable political leaders, and particularly Republicans right now in the country?
Well, I'd have to say Liz Cheney. I mean, I didn't agree with her particularly on a lot of her stands when she was in, well, she still is in Congress, but, you know, when she was more aligned with Trump on issues. But boy, has she shown herself to be a patriot and someone who believes in standing up for principle. And there's just nothing. Kinzinger, the same way. Unfortunately, he chose not to run for re-election, but the same thing that happened to Liz Cheney would probably have happened to him. And so he's stepping aside. But those are the kinds of people that we really support. And then you look around the country and you have a number of races where you have former Republicans who have become independents who are now running. Evan McMullen in Utah is someone that we have supported. Fingers crossed that he can do better than the current polls are showing, but we're working hard for him. And those are the kinds of people that we think deserve to be heard, and the public needs to know about them and understand that we can build. It's going to take time. I'm fearful that this is going to be an ugly election as far as I'm concerned on the kind of people I'd like to see take office. So it'll be a rough 2 years until we can do something about it again. But in that time frame, you know, there's a part of me that says, I hope all the crazies do win and everybody has to live with that for a while and see how much they like it. But then I realized, no, I don't want to have to live in that world, and I don't want to leave it for my grandkids either, the damage they can do. So if it goes the way that it looks like it might, with Republicans taking control of the House and Hopefully not the Senate, but there's a possibility of that. It's going to be a rough 2 years, but it also gives us an opening to really let people know what a difference elections make, how important it is to vote, and to consider those candidates and to understand what they mean for the future and policy making.
Now, I'm curious, Governor, if you were to run this year or in the current political environment, do you think you could win as a Republican?
Oh, I wouldn't be a Republican. The Republican Party would never nominate me.
Right.
I am a complete anathema as far as they're concerned.
Would you ever run again? I mean,
no.
If you were, but I mean in the sense of, if this was your time when you were trying to be governor, would you ever have run in the first place? If this was
I ran for governor because I wanted to make a difference, and I wanted to do things for the state and correct some things that I thought were very wrong. If that were the case today, yes, of course, I'd still run no matter what the odds are. I mean, when I ran for the U.S. Senate in 1990, the odds were huge against me because I was running against Bill Bradley, who was going to be the next Democrat presidential candidate, and he'd beaten his first re-election opponent by 16 percentage points. But I knew what I wanted to do, and I went ahead and did it. So, yeah, I would, but I certainly wouldn't be a Republican candidate. They wouldn't nominate me.
To get into a little bit of the Jersey politics, to our shared relationship, some of your successors, I guess, unlike you, are still very ambitious. We know Governor Christie, for example, still wants to be a candidate. And what do you think about that? Do you think he has a shot at running or in this political environment?
Oh, I think he definitely wants to run, and he's got a record to point to. I think he has a challenge in that he's become a huge Trump critic, but he was such a Trump supporter for so long that that's going to be a challenge for him to weave his way through as to how that change came about. But he's someone who can be competitive.
Do you speak with him ever? Do you still talk to him at all? Or?
I talk to him from time to time. We run into one another, but we don't have a regular conversation or anything.
Okay. And I know we only have a little bit of time left, so I want to ask you about the state of democracy. I know we touched on this briefly, but you're doing so much work to promote continuing democracy and to, free and fair elections and whatever else. I mean, what do you think is the next step? Obviously the midterm elections and putting the right candidates in place, but what can reporters, everyday citizens be doing to better make sure that democracy is protected?
Well, one of the most important things, and we say it a lot at States United Democracy Center, that I also co-chair, and that is an organization that is absolutely non-political. We're working with states' attorneys general and governors and secretaries of state to help them push back against some of these efforts to undermine confidence in the vote. I mean, we need to keep reminding people the 2020 election was safe, secure, and accurate. And there's no denying that. And it happened in the middle of a pandemic with an administration, with a president who had been saying for decades before that election was going to be stolen. If he didn't win, elections were going to be stolen. When Mitt Romney didn't win, Donald Trump was saying clearly the election was stolen. We need to remind people that we have a system that works, and we don't need to keep passing these laws that are undermining the public's ability to vote, and that everybody who is legally eligible to vote should be able to vote. The good news is that over 70% of Americans say they'd rather have every vote counted than have their candidate win. And so that's what we need to appeal to, and we need to follow what States United is doing, because we're just the facts. I mean, there's no partisan overlay in that at all. And Forward is a political movement. States United is not. It's very different. But really what you're doing now and helping to educate people on the importance of elections, on all elections, the importance of educating people on what the various offices do, because we don't teach civics anymore, and half the people have no idea that a Secretary of State has any oversight. Of course, it varies from state to state how much influence they have on the election, but they clearly are involved in the election. And we need to have the backs of the people that are willing to stand up and continue to protect the system, because very often all I hear is the critics, and they're being physically threatened now. And you have people who are just doing their job, just counting ballots, just overseeing how the election progresses, and they're having to protect themselves. People have had to move. People have had to hire guards, and we saw what happened with Paul Pelosi. That's this kind of activism, this kind of unleashing of passions in a way that allows for not just verbal abuse, but physical abuse as well, has got to stop. And we need to tell people how dangerous it is.
And we're out of time, but two very quick yes or no questions. One, do you think President Biden is doing a good job right now? And two, do you think he should run again?
No to the second. I think he's too old. Depends. And there's really not a yes or no to is the president doing a good job, because you'll say yes on some things and no on others.
Yeah, maybe it's an unfair, not a yes or no, but we'll have to leave it there, Governor. Thank you so much for your time today. I think this was a really great conversation. I appreciate you being here.
My pleasure.